Hey guys, tonight we're exploring a story that everyone in history should know. The story is Medieval Art Theft, the Hidden History. You get comfortable, take a moment, like the video, and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Medieval art, theft, the hidden history. There is something strangely fascinating about stolen art. Today, when we hear about an artwork disappearing from a museum, we imagine sophisticated thieves, laser alarms, forged identities, and international criminal networks. But the story of art theft is far older than modern museums. Long before paintings hung behind protective glass, before insurance companies existed, and before governments established cultural heritage laws, priceless works of art were already disappearing into the shadows. The Middle Ages, stretching roughly from the 5th century to the 15th century, witnessed countless acts of theft involving sacred treasures, illuminated manuscripts, jeweled crosses, royal crowns, relics, sculptures, tapestries, and precious religious objects. Many of these thefts never appeared in official chronicles. Others were quietly ignored because powerful rulers themselves ordered the crimes. Some thefts were even celebrated instead of condemned. To understand medieval art theft, we first have to understand what people considered art. The modern idea of art as something created primarily for beauty did not exist in the same way. Nearly every valuable object served multiple purposes. A golden chalice was a religious instrument. A painted manuscript preserved knowledge. A carved ivory panel demonstrated political authority. A jeweled crown represented divine kingship. Beauty, faith, wealth, and power were inseparable. That meant stealing one object often meant stealing much more than gold or silver. Imagine entering a medieval cathedral. Sunlight filters through colored glass, illuminating walls covered with paintings, carved saints standing along stone columns, massive wooden crucifixes suspended above the altar, shimmering reliquaries filled with precious gems, embroidered silk banners hanging from high beams, and books decorated with vibrant pigments made from rare minerals imported across continents. Every object represented years of labor. Some required decades. Many involved dozens of craftsmen. Goldsmiths hammered delicate metalwork by hand. Scribes copied thousands of lines with incredible patience. Artists crushed expensive minerals into brilliant pigments. Wood carvers transformed heavy oak into lifelike figures. Stone masons shaped entire biblical stories into cathedral walls. These were not simply decorations. They were investments of extraordinary human effort. They were symbols of devotion. They were statements of political legitimacy. And because they were so valuable, they naturally attracted thieves. But medieval thieves were rarely the mysterious masked figures portrayed in novels. Sometimes they were monks, sometimes priests, sometimes noblemen, sometimes soldiers, sometimes kings, sometimes bishops. sometimes the very people responsible for protecting these treasures. One of the greatest misunderstandings about medieval crime is the belief that churches were always safe places. In reality, churches often contained the richest collections of portable wealth in an entire region. Gold, silver, ivory, gemstones, silk, embroidered cloth, illuminated books, relic containers, ceremonial weapons, and royal gifts accumulated over centuries. Many churches became treasure houses. Unfortunately, treasure houses attract treasure hunters. Unlike ordinary homes, churches could contain objects worth fortunes. Imagine a single jeweled cross containing dozens of large gemstones, solid gold decoration, imported pearl, and finely crafted enamel work. Melting it down could finance military campaigns or enrich an ambitious noble family. The temptation proved irresistible. Yet not every thief wanted gold. Some wanted relics. This may sound strange today. Why would someone risk execution to steal the bones of a saint? Because relics generated enormous prestige. Pilgrims traveled hundreds of miles to visit famous relics. Pilgrims donated money. Kings offered protection. Merchants benefited from increased trade. Entire towns became prosperous because they possessed the remains, or what people believed were the remains, of a revered saint. Owning a relic transformed a church into a destination. That meant relic theft became surprisingly common. In fact, medieval writers even developed a special language to justify such crimes. Instead of calling them thefts, they sometimes described them as holy translations. According to these stories, the saint miraculously wished to move to another church. The people carrying away the relics claimed they were simply obeying divine will. Whether anyone truly believed these explanations remains difficult to know, but the result was the same. Sacred treasures disappeared. New churches celebrated miraculous arrivals. Old churches mourned devastating losses. This blurred the line between devotion and criminality. If everyone believed God approved the transfer, was it still theft? Different communities answered that question differently. Political circumstances often determine the answer. If a powerful ruler supported the removal, critics remained silent. If enemies committed the same act, chroniclers described it as sacrilege. History often depended on who held power. Art theft also flourished during war. Every medieval conflict produced enormous opportunities for looting. Victorious armies entered cities. Churches were stripped. Monasteries burned. Libraries vanished. Royal collections disappeared. Precious metal objects were especially vulnerable. Unlike stone sculptures or enormous buildings, gold objects could be carried away quickly. Even worse, they could be melted. Once melted, centuries of artistic achievement disappeared forever. The gold survived. The artwork did not. Modern historians often know magnificent masterpieces existed only because medieval writers described them before they vanished. Imagine reading about an extraordinary golden altar covered with gemstones, crafted by the greatest artists of its age. Now imagine learning that invading soldiers melted the entire masterpiece into anonymous bars of gold. That happened repeatedly. Economic necessity frequently outweighed artistic appreciation. Gold was money. Art was secondary. This explains why surprisingly little medieval goldsmith work survives. Compared with paintings or stone architecture, thousands of masterpieces likely disappeared inside furnaces. Their artistic identity was erased forever. Another important factor encouraged medieval art theft. Documentation remained limited. Today, museums maintain inventories, photographs, insurance records, ownership histories, and digital archives. Medieval institutions possessed nothing comparable. Some monasteries kept handwritten inventories. Others relied entirely upon memory. If an object disappeared during political chaos, proving ownership became almost impossible. Forgery flourished. Fake donation documents appeared. Invented inheritance claims circulated. Powerful nobles declared objects belonged to their ancestors. Without centralized legal systems capable of investigating across kingdoms, disputes often remained unresolved. Distance created another advantage for thieves. Transport networks were slow. Communication traveled slowly. A stolen object carried several hundred miles entered an entirely different political world. People there rarely knew its true origin. They simply admired its craftsmanship. The object's history disappeared. Its beauty remained. Even skilled artists sometimes unknowingly helped conceal stolen treasures. A damaged reliquary might arrive for repairs. The goldsmith restored it beautifully. Nobody questioned how the owner acquired it. An illuminated manuscript could be rebound with a new cover. Old ownership marks disappeared. Generations later, the manuscript appeared completely legitimate. The theft vanished into history. Markets also played an important role. Although medieval Europe lacked modern art dealers, merchants regularly traded luxury goods, ivory carvings from distant lands, silks from Byzantium, metalwork from Germany, glass from Venice, carved caskets from Islamic workshops. Traveling merchants connected distant regions. Among legitimate goods, stolen treasures occasionally found new buyers. Sometimes purchasers genuinely had no idea. Other times they deliberately ignored suspicious origins. Human nature changes remarkably little across centuries. If something valuable becomes available at an unusually attractive price, questions often become inconvenient. Monasteries themselves sometimes became victims through trust. Hospitality formed one of their sacred duties. Travelers frequently received food and shelter. Most guests behaved honestly. A few carefully observed the location of valuables. They noted weak doors, poorly guarded treasuries, night routines. Then they returned later. Preparation often mattered more than force. Not every theft required violence. Some required patience, others required deception. Still others required inside assistance. Servants, caretakers, clergy, craftsmen. Every institution depended upon human honesty. Whenever honesty failed, priceless treasures became vulnerable. Ironically, medieval artists themselves sometimes contributed unintentionally to theft. The increasing realism and sophistication of religious art made certain objects even more desirable. As craftsmanship improved, demand increased. Powerful rulers competed to acquire extraordinary works. Competition encouraged acquisition by any means available: gift, purchase, inheritance, confiscation, or theft. The boundaries blurred constantly. What one ruler considered rightful conquest, another remembered as robbery. Centuries later, historians still debate many famous cases. Perhaps the greatest tragedy lies not in what was stolen, but in what disappeared completely. Entire artistic traditions survive only through scattered written descriptions. A chronicler might praise a dazzling altar unlike anything ever created. No drawing survives. No fragments remain, only words. Perhaps it was stolen, perhaps melted, perhaps destroyed by fire, perhaps hidden forever. No one knows. This uncertainty gives medieval art theft its enduring mystery. Every missing object leaves unanswered questions. Where did it go? Who took it? Why? Could it still exist somewhere today? Many remarkable discoveries have answered such questions unexpectedly. Forgotten manuscripts emerged from monastery libraries. Hidden sculptures appeared inside church walls during renovations. Treasures buried during invasions resurfaced beneath farmland centuries later. Sometimes objects believed destroyed had merely been concealed. Fear inspired preservation. Communities occasionally hid sacred treasures before invading armies arrived. Not every hiding place was remembered. Generations passed, wars ended. Those who knew the secret died. The treasure remained underground. When modern archaeologists uncover these hidden collections, they reveal not only artistic brilliance but also the desperate fear that once gripped medieval communities. Every buried object tells a story of uncertainty. Someone believed tomorrow might bring destruction. Someone hoped the future would recover what the present could not protect. Sometimes that hope succeeded. Sometimes it failed. Throughout this series, we will explore forgotten crimes, legendary relic thefts, disappearing manuscripts, royal plunder, cathedral robberies, wartime looting, ambitious collectors, deceptive monks, political conspiracies, mysterious recoveries, and countless unanswered questions that continue to fascinate historians today. Because the hidden history of medieval art theft is not merely about stolen objects. It is about power, faith, greed, memory, and humanity's endless struggle over who owns the past. If medieval churches were among the richest places in Europe, monasteries were often their greatest libraries. Hidden behind thick stone walls were thousands of handwritten manuscripts, each one representing months or even years of painstaking work. Every page had been copied by hand. Every decorated letter required precision. Every illustration demanded expensive pigments and remarkable patience. A single illuminated manuscript could consume the labor of several people over many seasons. To us, these books are priceless works of art. To medieval communities, there was something even greater. They contained sacred knowledge, legal records, scientific observations, medical advice, histories, poetry, and the memory of entire civilizations. Stealing one was not simply taking a book. It meant taking a piece of a community's identity. Yet manuscripts disappeared with surprising frequency.
Some vanished during wars, some during fires, some were exchanged honestly between monasteries. Others quietly found their way into private collections through theft. Unlike heavy stone sculptures or large altarpieces, books could be hidden beneath clothing, inside travel chests, or among ordinary luggage. A determined thief could leave a monastery carrying an object that represented years of artistic brilliance. Many scribes understood this danger. That is why some manuscripts contain extraordinary warnings. At the end of a book, readers occasionally encountered frightening curses directed at anyone tempted to steal it. The words could be severe. They promised divine punishment, eternal suffering, blindness, disease, excommunication. Some declared that anyone stealing the manuscript would be cursed until the end of time. These warnings were not decorative. They reflected genuine fear. Medieval librarians knew locks alone were not enough. Spiritual threats might discourage those whom physical security could not stop. Whether the curses worked remains impossible to measure. What we do know is that books continued to disappear. Some thieves probably ignored the warnings. Others may have convinced themselves that necessity justified their actions. Not every stolen manuscript was sold. Some were taken because another monastery desperately wanted a copy. Instead of requesting permission, ambitious leaders occasionally chose the quicker path. A valuable manuscript would quietly vanish from one library and mysteriously appear in another. Centuries later, tracing its journey becomes almost impossible. Ownership marks were sometimes erased, pages were replaced, new bindings concealed old histories. The object survived. Its true story faded. The same pattern appeared with religious artworks. A carved wooden saint might be removed from one chapel and installed in another hundreds of miles away. A magnificent silver chalice could acquire a new inscription honoring a different donor. A reliquary might be decorated with additional jewels until its original appearance became almost unrecognizable. Every alteration buried another layer of history. This raises an important question. How do historians identify medieval theft today? Rarely through confessions. Instead, they compare documents, inventories from different monasteries, letters between bishops, royal financial records, travel diaries, archaeological discoveries. Sometimes an object described in one document suddenly appears elsewhere under suspicious circumstances. The dates do not match. The explanations seem incomplete. The silence becomes meaningful. History often hides inside what people chose not to write. Another fascinating aspect of medieval art theft involves craftsmen themselves. Goldsmiths, jewelers, painters, and sculptors frequently traveled between cities. They worked for bishops, kings, abbots, and wealthy patrons. Most earned their living honestly. But skilled craftsmen possessed knowledge that ordinary thieves lacked. They understood construction techniques. They knew how precious objects could be dismantled. They recognized valuable materials at a glance. Some may have been recruited by criminals specifically because of these skills. Imagine stealing a jeweled cross. Removing the gemstones carelessly might damage them. An experienced goldsmith could separate each stone with minimal loss. The artwork disappeared. The valuable materials survived. Those materials could then be reused in completely different objects. A ruby once decorating a cathedral treasure might later appear inside a royal crown. No one looking at the finished crown would suspect its hidden history. Recycling precious materials was common throughout the Middle Ages. Gold rarely remained in one form forever. Crowns became chalices. Chalices became reliquaries. Reliquaries became coins. Coins became jewelry. Art constantly transformed. Unfortunately, stolen objects entered this cycle as well.
Sometimes entire masterpieces vanished simply because their materials were considered more valuable than their artistic design. Political instability made everything worse. Europe during the Middle Ages was rarely peaceful for long. Kingdoms expanded, dynasties collapsed, civil wars erupted, foreign invasions swept across regions. Each conflict placed artistic treasures at enormous risk. An invading army did not always distinguish between military wealth and cultural heritage. Victory often meant taking whatever could be carried. Church bells were melted metal. Silver shrines disappeared. Paintings were damaged. Libraries burned. Some commanders attempted to protect religious sites. Others viewed them as legitimate sources of wealth. The outcome depended largely upon individual leadership. One city might escape untouched. Another could lose centuries of artistic achievement in a single day. Perhaps the saddest stories involve communities trying desperately to save their treasures. As rumors of approaching armies spread, monks sometimes buried reliquaries beneath church floors. Citizens concealed statues inside walls. Royal families hid crowns beneath castle foundations. These decisions were made quickly, often under tremendous fear. Sometimes the owners returned after the danger passed. Sometimes they never came back. Centuries later, construction workers unexpectedly discover forgotten treasures exactly where frightened medieval hands concealed them. These discoveries remind us that not every missing artwork was stolen. Some were hidden too successfully. Fear preserved them. Memory failed them. The medieval world also experienced another unusual form of theft. Pieces of famous artworks were occasionally removed without taking the entire object. A jewel from a crown, a decorative panel from a shrine, a carved ivory figure from a larger ensemble. These smaller pieces were easier to conceal and sell. Unfortunately, removing one section often damaged the remaining artwork forever. Modern conservators sometimes find empty spaces where precious stones once rested. The settings remain. The jewels are long gone. Those missing pieces tell silent stories of theft committed hundreds of years ago. Greed rarely stopped with religious institutions. Royal palaces faced similar dangers. Kings accumulated luxurious objects to demonstrate authority. Golden drinking vessels, decorated weapons, fine tapestries, rare imported goods, ceremonial robes, magnificent furniture. Every succession crisis created opportunities for theft. When one ruler died, confusion followed. Servants disappeared. Officials changed loyalties.
Treasuries were inventoried. Not everything listed could always be found. Some objects quietly entered private hands before new administrations took control. Power transitions have always created moments of uncertainty. The Middle Ages were no exception. Even castles designed for defense struggled to protect portable treasures. Strong walls could stop invading armies. They could not always prevent betrayal from within.
Throughout history, insiders have remained among the greatest threats to valuable collections. A trusted guardian possessed keys. A respected official understood routines. A loyal servant knew hidden passages. External defenses mattered little if internal trust collapsed. Religious festivals also presented unexpected opportunities. On major feast days, churches filled with pilgrims. Crowds admired relics displayed for public viewing.
The atmosphere combined celebration with devotion. Unfortunately, crowded spaces made surveillance difficult. Professional thieves blended easily among worshippers. Confusion became their greatest ally. By the time anyone noticed a missing object,
The criminal might already be miles away. Medieval justice treated theft seriously, especially when sacred property was involved. Punishments could be harsh. Fines, imprisonment, public humiliation, mutilation, even execution in certain circumstances. Yet severe penalties did not eliminate crime. The rewards remained too tempting. A single successful theft could transform a person's fortune. That possibility encouraged extraordinary risks. As medieval trade expanded, stolen objects traveled farther than ever before. Merchant routes connected northern Europe with Italy, Byzantium, the Islamic world, and beyond. Luxury goods crossed mountains and seas. Among legitimate cargo, stolen treasures occasionally disappeared into international commerce. Once an object crossed political borders, recovery became increasingly unlikely. Jurisdictions differed. Communication remained slow. Documentation stayed incomplete. Distance protected criminals almost as effectively as secrecy. Modern historians continue uncovering remarkable evidence from these forgotten journeys. Scientific analysis sometimes identifies stone, pigments, metals, or wood originating far from an artwork's supposed place of creation. Each discovery raises new questions. Was the object traded legally, presented as a diplomatic gift, captured during war, or quietly stolen centuries ago? The answers are not always clear. What is certain is that medieval art rarely remained completely still. Objects traveled, owners changed, stories evolved. Some journeys were honorable, others were hidden beneath layers of silence. And it is within those silences that the hidden history of medieval art theft continues to reveal itself. As the Middle Ages progressed, Europe became a landscape filled with magnificent cathedrals that dominated the skylines of growing cities. Their towering spires could be seen from miles away, reminding travelers that they were approaching places of faith, commerce, and political influence. But behind those massive stone walls lay something that attracted more than pilgrims. Hidden within their treasuries were some of the richest collections of artistic masterpieces ever assembled in medieval Europe. Every generation added something new,
A king donated a golden chalice after surviving a battle. A queen presented an embroidered altar cloth decorated with pearls. A wealthy merchant commissioned a silver cross to celebrate his prosperity. A bishop ordered a magnificent reliquary to honor a local saint. Century after century, these treasures accumulated. The result was extraordinary. Many cathedral treasuries contained fortunes beyond imagination. Ironically, the very success of these collections created constant danger. The larger the collection became, the more difficult it was to protect. Guards watched entrances. Heavy doors were reinforced with iron. Locks became increasingly sophisticated. Secret chambers were constructed beneath floors and behind thick walls. Yet every new security measure reflected one uncomfortable reality. People expected theft. Some thieves relied upon patience rather than force. Instead of attempting dramatic nighttime robberies, they visited cathedrals repeatedly. They observed daily routines. They watched when priests unlocked treasury doors. They noticed which servants carried keys. They learned which festivals attracted the largest crowds. Weeks or even months of careful observation often proved more valuable than weapons. Knowledge became the greatest tool of all. One of the most remarkable aspects of medieval theft is how frequently criminals used deception instead of violence. A man dressed as a pilgrim attracted little attention. A traveler claiming to deliver an important message could move freely through religious buildings. Someone pretending to be a craftsman might request access to valuable objects for inspection or repair. Trust opened doors that brute force never could. This reliance upon appearances created endless opportunities. Clothing carried enormous authority during the Middle Ages. Religious robes inspired respect. Noble garments suggested influence. Merchant attire implied legitimate business. Few people questioned individuals whose appearance matched accepted social roles. Criminals understood this human tendency perfectly. Some simply wore the right clothes. Others forged letters bearing impressive seals. A convincing document could persuade officials to release valuable objects temporarily. Whether those objects ever returned was another matter entirely. Forgery itself became an unexpected partner to art theft. A stolen object often needed a believable history. Invented donation records appeared. False ownership claims circulated. Fake royal permissions justified suspicious transfers. Medieval scribes possessed remarkable skill. Unfortunately, that skill occasionally served dishonest purposes. Centuries later, historians still debate the authenticity of certain documents connected with famous treasures. Some are genuine, others are brilliant deceptions. Separating truth from fiction requires extraordinary detective work. Meanwhile, medieval markets continued expanding. Trade fairs attracted merchants from distant kingdoms. Luxury goods changed hands in enormous quantities. Silks from the East, amber from the Baltic, ivory from Africa, spices from Asia, metalwork from Germany, glass from Venice. Within this international movement of wealth, stolen artworks sometimes disappeared without leaving obvious traces. Unlike today, there were no centralized databases listing missing treasures. A beautiful object arriving from another kingdom naturally attracted admiration. Few buyers demanded detailed ownership histories. Beauty itself often became sufficient recommendation. Collectors also played an important role. Although the modern concept of private art collecting had not fully developed, wealthy rulers eagerly accumulated extraordinary objects. Possessing rare artworks enhanced prestige. Foreign ambassadors admired impressive collections. Visiting nobles compared treasures. Religious leaders displayed magnificent ceremonial objects during important celebrations. Every exceptional acquisition strengthened political authority. This competition occasionally encouraged questionable methods. If a rival possessed something extraordinary, the temptation to obtain something even greater became powerful. Sometimes the object was purchased, sometimes exchanged, sometimes inherited, and sometimes acquired through far darker means. Not every theft happened in secret. War openly legitimized looting in many medieval societies. Victorious armies expected rewards. Cities that resisted siege often suffered devastating consequences. Churches, monasteries, and palaces became targets. Soldiers searched for portable wealth. Gold and silver disappeared first. Jewels followed. Books, tapestries, and carved ivories were taken whenever transportation allowed. The destruction extended beyond financial loss. Every stolen object carried stories. Generations of memory vanished alongside precious materials. Entire communities lost symbols that had defined their identity for centuries. Imagine entering a cathedral where your grandparents worshipped. The altar is empty. The shrine has disappeared. The jeweled cross presented by a beloved king is gone. The illuminated gospel book copied by local monks has vanished. The building still stands, but something essential has been taken from its soul. This emotional loss rarely appears in financial records, yet medieval writers occasionally expressed profound grief over disappearing treasures. Their descriptions reveal heartbreak rather than simple accounting. They mourned beauty itself. Some chroniclers carefully recorded stolen objects in remarkable detail, dimensions, materials, gemstones, decorations, inscriptions. These descriptions now provide priceless evidence for historians. Without them, countless masterpieces would be completely forgotten. Ironically, theft sometimes preserved memory. The crime inspired documentation. Documentation survived. The artwork did not. There were also thieves motivated by personal ambition rather than wealth. Certain relics attracted enormous respect. Owning them transformed obscure monasteries into famous pilgrimage destinations. Pilgrims brought donations. Donations funded new buildings. New buildings increased prestige. Prestige attracted more pilgrims. It became a powerful cycle. Some ambitious religious communities concluded that obtaining a famous relic would solve many problems at once. If peaceful negotiation failed, less honorable methods occasionally followed. Stories soon emerged claiming that saints themselves desired relocation. Miracles conveniently supported suspicious transfers. Opponents called the events theft. Supporters called them divine intervention. History rarely provides unanimous verdicts. The medieval imagination accepted possibilities that modern readers often find surprising. Dreams, visions, signs, prophecies. Many people genuinely believed saints communicated their wishes. This belief blurred legal and spiritual boundaries. If heaven approved, earthly objections seemed less important. Whether such claims reflected sincere faith or convenient justification remains one of history's enduring mysteries. Another overlooked aspect of medieval art theft involves natural disasters. After earthquakes, fires, floods, or building collapses, confusion often followed. Rescue efforts focused on saving lives. Damaged treasures lay unattended. Opportunists sometimes entered ruined buildings, pretending to help. Instead, valuable objects quietly disappeared. Disaster created cover for crime. By the time inventories resumed, determining what had been lost naturally and what had been stolen became nearly impossible. Fire posed especially complex problems. Many medieval churches contained wooden furnishings, wax candles, fabrics, and manuscripts. Once flames spread, destruction happened quickly. During chaotic attempts to rescue sacred objects, records frequently disappeared as well. Later generations struggled to reconstruct events. Did a jeweled chalice melt in the fire? Or did someone remove it before the flames reached the treasury? Sometimes nobody ever discovered the answer. The uncertainty itself became part of the story. Modern archaeological discoveries occasionally resolve centuries-old mysteries. Excavations beneath cathedral floors have uncovered forgotten hiding places. Walls conceal sealed chambers. Foundations preserve buried objects, coins, reliquaries, manuscript fragments, carved ivories, and decorative metalwork emerge from darkness after hundreds of years. Each discovery reminds us that medieval people constantly balanced fear with hope. They feared invasion. They feared theft. They feared destruction. Yet they also hoped future generations would recover what they struggled to protect. Sometimes those hopes succeeded beyond imagination. A treasure hidden during one century might remain untouched until archaeologists rediscovered it hundreds of years later. The people who buried it could never have imagined the world that would eventually uncover their secret. Their kingdoms vanished. Their languages evolved. Their rulers became names in history books. But the objects remained patiently waiting beneath the earth. These remarkable survivals contrast sharply with countless treasures that vanished forever. For every masterpiece rediscovered, dozens were likely melted, dismantled, scattered, or simply forgotten. That imbalance gives medieval art history its haunting quality. Historians often study absence as much as survival. Missing inventories, broken foundations, empty jewel settings, references in forgotten chronicles. Tiny clues combine into larger stories. Every fragment asks another question. Every unanswered question invites another investigation. And somewhere between documented fact and enduring mystery lies the hidden history of medieval art theft. A history shaped not only by criminals, but by kings, bishops, merchants, soldiers, collectors, craftsmen, pilgrims, and ordinary people whose decisions determined whether priceless works of art would survive or disappear forever. While thieves often worked in darkness, not every act of medieval art theft happened in secret. Some of the greatest losses occurred in broad daylight, carried out under royal banners, military orders, or religious authority. To the people who benefited, these acts were celebrated as victories. To those who suffered them, they became unforgettable tragedies. History has always depended on perspective. A conquering king rarely described himself as a thief. He spoke of justice, victory, divine favor, rightful inheritance, political necessity. Yet for the defeated, the result was exactly the same. Their treasures disappeared. Their sacred objects were carried away. Their artistic heritage became someone else's glory. This pattern repeated itself across medieval Europe. When cities surrendered, victorious rulers frequently demanded valuable objects as part of the peace agreement. Sometimes gold and silver were requested, sometimes important manuscripts, sometimes bells, relics, royal regalia, or ceremonial crosses. These demands were presented as legal compensation rather than theft. The distinction mattered politically, but emotionally, communities experienced the same painful loss. One of the most vulnerable moments came immediately after a successful siege. A city might endure weeks or months of starvation. Food supplies disappeared. Disease spread. Buildings suffered constant bombardment. When the gates finally opened, discipline often collapsed. Even commanders who wished to prevent looting struggled to control thousands of exhausted soldiers, expecting rewards. Treasuries became immediate targets. Churches, monasteries, and palaces held concentrated wealth, unlike anything found in ordinary homes. Portable treasures vanished within hours. Heavy stone architecture survived. Everything that could be carried often did not. The tragedy was not simply financial. Many medieval masterpieces were unique. Unlike coins, they could never truly be replaced. An illuminated gospel created by a famous scriptorium reflected the style of a particular generation. A carved ivory reliquary combined artistic traditions from several cultures. A jeweled altar frontal might represent decades of donations from countless families. Destroying such an object erased layers of history impossible to recreate. Some rulers genuinely appreciated artistic excellence. Instead of melting valuable works, they transported them intact to decorate their own churches and palaces. This decision unintentionally preserved many masterpieces, yet preservation came at a cost. The communities that created those objects lost them forever. Centuries later, historians still debate whether these treasures should remain where they survived or return to the places where they originally belonged. The question has no easy answer. Another remarkable feature of medieval art theft involves symbolism. Stealing a ruler's crown carried obvious political meaning. But taking a city's ceremonial banner or a monastery's famous reliquary could be equally powerful. Such objects represented identity itself, Possessing them demonstrated dominance. Displaying them publicly sent unmistakable messages. Power had changed hands. Victory had been confirmed. Authority now belonged to someone else. Medieval audiences understood these symbols immediately. Art was never merely decoration. It communicated legitimacy, faith, tradition, prestige. Removing those symbols weakened defeated communities even after military conflict ended. The psychological impact could last generations. Sometimes the theft of one object inspired legends that survived far longer than the object itself. People remembered miraculous icons disappearing overnight. Stories spread about angels protecting stolen relics. Others claimed thieves suffered mysterious illnesses after touching sacred treasures. These tales reflected genuine beliefs. Many medieval people viewed certain artworks as spiritually powerful. Stealing them was not simply a crime against property, it was an offense against heaven. Whether miracles truly occurred is beyond the reach of history. What can be studied is the remarkable consistency of these stories across different regions. Again and again, chroniclers describe thieves experiencing terrifying consequences. Blindness, madness, sudden death, nightmares, unexplained disasters. These accounts served practical purposes as well. They warned future criminals. Fear could protect treasures when physical security proved insufficient. Interestingly, not every thief ignored religion. Some prayed before committing theft. Others donated portions of stolen wealth to churches. A few believed charitable gifts might compensate for criminal actions. Modern readers may find this contradictory. Yet medieval moral thinking often contained similar complexities. People lived in a deeply religious world while remaining fully capable of greed, ambition, and violence. Human nature rarely fits simple categories. Professional criminals also evolved. Early medieval theft often involved isolated individuals. By the later Middle Ages, evidence suggests more organized groups occasionally cooperated. One person gathered information, another transported stolen goods, another arranged buyers, another altered identifying features. Although nothing resembling modern criminal syndicates existed, cooperation increased the chances of success. Networks mattered, trade routes mattered, trusted contacts mattered. A stolen object became far more difficult to recover once several people participated in concealing its origins. Monasteries gradually responded by strengthening their security. Treasure rooms acquired stronger locks. Windows became smaller. Important keys were entrusted to multiple officials. Some valuable objects remained hidden except during major religious festivals. Inventories were updated more carefully. Yet every improvement introduced new challenges. Greater secrecy meant fewer people knew where treasures were kept. If those individuals died unexpectedly during war or plague, hidden collections might remain lost indefinitely. The arrival of plague in the 14th century created entirely new problems. Communities collapsed under the weight of overwhelming mortality. Priests died, monks died, craftsmen died, nobles died. Entire monasteries lost most of their inhabitants within months. Buildings stood nearly abandoned. Treasuries remained poorly guarded. Records went unfinished. Chaos created opportunities for theft on an unprecedented scale. At the same time, countless artistic treasures simply disappeared because no one remained alive to remember their existence. Sometimes later generations rediscovered forgotten storage rooms. Other times they never did. The Black Death reshaped medieval Europe in countless ways. Its impact upon cultural heritage remains impossible to measure completely. Economic hardship also encouraged crime. Failed harvests, famine, rising taxes, and political instability pushed many ordinary people toward desperate choices. Most never stole sacred objects. A few did. When survival itself seemed uncertain, moral boundaries occasionally weakened. Historians must remember that behind many medieval crimes stood complex human circumstances rather than simple greed. That understanding does not excuse theft, but it explains why it persisted despite severe punishments. Throughout Europe, cathedral chapters and monasteries continued commissioning remarkable new works despite repeated losses. This resilience deserves admiration. Communities refused to abandon beauty. After invasions, they rebuilt. After fires, they commissioned new altars. After thefts, they created new reliquaries. Artists trained new apprentices. Goldsmiths hammered fresh designs. Scribes copied new manuscripts. Generation after generation, creativity overcame destruction. Without that determination, almost none of medieval Europe's artistic heritage would have survived. Ironically, repeated theft sometimes inspired greater artistic innovation. Replacing lost masterpieces encouraged experimentation. New techniques appeared. Fresh decorative styles emerged. Different regional traditions blended together. Loss and creation became strangely connected. History rarely follows simple paths. Destruction can unexpectedly produce renewal. Yet every replacement also reminds us of what vanished before it. Some masterpieces were copied from memory. Others were recreated using written descriptions. None could truly replace the originals. Their absence remained. Today, when visitors admire medieval cathedrals and museums, they often assume they are seeing complete collections. In reality, they are looking at survivors. Behind every surviving chalice may stand 10 that disappeared. Behind every illuminated manuscript, preserved in a library, may lie dozens consumed by war, fire, neglect, or theft. The medieval artistic world we know today is only a fraction of what once existed. The hidden history of medieval art theft is therefore not simply the story of criminals stealing beautiful objects. It is the story of civilizations struggling to protect their memories against war, ambition, greed, disaster, and time itself. And as we continue deeper into this forgotten world, we will discover that some of the most astonishing medieval thefts were so daring, so mysterious, and so cleverly concealed that historians are still trying to unravel their secrets hundreds of years later. Among all the treasures that disappeared during the Middle Ages, few were considered as valuable as reliquaries. These were not simply containers made of gold, silver, or ivory. They were believed to protect the physical remains of saints, fragments of the true cross, pieces of sacred clothing, or other objects connected with holy figures. To medieval Christians, these relics formed a bridge between the earthly world and the divine. Because of that belief, a reliquary possessed two different kinds of value. Its artistic beauty made it desirable. Its spiritual importance made it priceless. The combination proved irresistible. Entire communities measured their prestige by the relics they possessed. Pilgrims traveled extraordinary distances to visit famous shrines. They spent money on food, lodging, candles, souvenirs, and donations. Local merchants prospered, roads improved, markets expanded. A single celebrated relic could transform a quiet town into one of the busiest pilgrimage destinations in Europe. Where pilgrims gathered, wealth followed. Where wealth accumulated, temptation appeared. Some of the boldest medieval thefts involved relics themselves. Unlike ordinary criminals seeking gold, relic thieves often claimed noble intentions. They argued that a saint had chosen a new resting place. According to these stories, miraculous signs confirmed the saint's wishes, locked doors supposedly opened by themselves. Guards mysteriously fell asleep. The relic became impossible to move until it reached its true destination. To believers, these stories demonstrated divine intervention. To modern historians, they raise difficult questions. Were these genuine religious experiences or carefully constructed explanations for organized theft? The answer often remains impossible to prove. One thing is certain. The practice became surprisingly widespread. In some cases, monks secretly entered another monastery at night, removed a relic, and escaped before dawn. Later, they recorded miraculous accounts describing how the saint willingly accompanied them. The theft gradually transformed into an accepted religious tradition. Communities that lost their relics rarely agreed with those explanations. For them, the event remained exactly what it appeared to be: a robbery. Many medieval chronicles reveal intense bitterness over these incidents. Monks described empty shrines with heartbreaking detail. They remembered the celebrations once held around their saints. They mourned the loss of pilgrims who no longer visited. The disappearance of a relic affected both spiritual life and economic survival. Some monasteries never recovered. Others spent decades trying to acquire new relics to restore their reputation. Demand inevitably created another problem: counterfeits. If authentic relics brought prestige and income, fake relics could produce similar rewards. Throughout medieval Europe, an astonishing trade in questionable relics developed. Fragments of wood claimed to come from the true cross, bones attributed to famous saints, pieces of ancient cloth connected to biblical figures. Not every relic was false. Many were sincerely venerated. Yet even medieval church leaders occasionally expressed concern about authenticity. Verifying origins proved almost impossible. Documents could be forged. Traditions changed over time. Oral histories evolved. Faith often filled the gaps left by uncertain evidence. This uncertainty encouraged another form of theft: If nobody could confidently identify an object's origin, replacing an authentic relic with an imitation became easier than one might expect. A valuable reliquary could disappear while an ordinary substitute occupied its place. Years passed. Generations changed. Eventually, few remembered exactly what had originally rested inside. The artistic craftsmanship of reliquaries made them extraordinary masterpieces in their own right. Goldsmiths covered wooden cores with sheets of precious metal. Enamel artists created brilliant colors using complex firing techniques. Gem cutters carefully positioned rubies, sapphires, emeralds, and pearls. Every surface reflected light. Every detail celebrated devotion. These were among the greatest artistic achievements of medieval Europe. Unfortunately, they also represented concentrated wealth. Invading armies frequently targeted cathedral treasuries specifically because of these magnificent objects. Once captured, many reliquaries faced tragic fates. Their jewels were removed, their gold was melted, their wooden cores burned. The relics themselves were scattered, lost, or destroyed. Centuries of artistic labor vanished within hours. Only written descriptions preserved their memory. Some rulers resisted this destruction. Recognizing exceptional craftsmanship, they transported entire reliquaries intact to their own capitals. Although this preserved remarkable works of art, it also removed them permanently from the communities that created them. Modern museums and cathedral treasuries sometimes display objects whose journeys began with medieval conquest. Each carries a complicated history. Admiration mixed with loss. Preservation intertwined with displacement. Not every famous theft involved precious metals. Ivory carvings ranked among the most admired luxury objects of the Middle Ages. Imported elephant ivory was rare and expensive. Master craftsmen transformed it into delicate panels depicting biblical scenes, saints, emperors, and royal ceremonies. The smooth white surface allowed astonishing detail. Tiny facial expressions, flowing garments, intricate architecture, animals carved with remarkable realism. Ivory objects traveled widely across Europe. Some were diplomatic gifts, others were traded honestly. Still others disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Because they were relatively small, they proved easier to conceal than large sculptures or altarpieces. Many medieval ivory masterpieces survive today, separated from their original settings. Panels once belonging to magnificent reliquaries or ceremonial furniture now exist alone. Historians sometimes suspect theft played a role in these separations. Another category of highly prized objects included illuminated manuscripts, decorated with gold leaf and brilliant pigments. These books demanded immense resources. Blue pigment made from lapis lazuli traveled thousands of miles from mines in present-day Afghanistan. Gold leaf required extraordinary skill to apply. Rare animal skins became parchment. Months of careful labor filled each page. Owning such a manuscript represented enormous prestige. Losing one meant far more than replacing paper and ink. Some monasteries chained valuable books to reading desks. Heavy iron chains limited movement, while still allowing scholars to study the texts. Visitors today occasionally see surviving examples of these chained libraries. The chains remind us that medieval librarians fully understood the danger of theft. Knowledge required protection. Beauty required protection. Memory required protection. Yet no chain could defend against determined invaders or trusted insiders. As trade expanded during the later Middle Ages, collectors developed increasingly sophisticated tastes. Exceptional craftsmanship became admired beyond purely religious purposes. Some nobles collected artworks simply because they appreciated beauty and rarity. This growing interest increased demand. Demand encouraged higher prices. Higher prices attracted criminals. The relationship between collectors and thieves became increasingly complex. Without intending to do so, wealthy patrons sometimes created markets for stolen objects. The medieval world slowly moved toward a broader appreciation of artistic excellence. Art no longer served only churches and kings. Private collections began expanding. Luxury objects became symbols of education, refinement, and international influence. This cultural shift transformed theft itself. Criminals adapted. Instead of stealing only precious metals, they increasingly recognized the value of craftsmanship. A beautifully carved ivory panel could be worth preserving intact. An illuminated manuscript might command greater respect, unaltered. Art gradually acquired value beyond its raw materials. This change would profoundly influence later centuries. By the end of the Middle Ages, the foundations of the modern art market were beginning to emerge. Collectors sought rarity. Artists earned reputations. Objects acquired documented histories. Questions of ownership became increasingly important. Yet countless medieval masterpieces had already vanished. Their stories survive only through scattered inventories, forgotten letters, damaged chronicles, and archaeological discoveries that continue to surprise historians today. Each rediscovered fragment offers another glimpse into a hidden world where faith, ambition, greed, politics, and extraordinary artistic achievement collided in ways that continue to shape our understanding of history. And as remarkable as these stories are, the greatest mysteries of medieval art theft are still waiting to unfold. By the 13th century, medieval Europe had become more connected than ever before. Trade routes stretched across kingdoms, merchant caravans crossed mountain passes, ships carried luxury goods through the Mediterranean and the Baltic Sea, and travelers moved between cities with increasing frequency. Along with spices, silk, precious metals, and rare textiles, another kind of cargo occasionally traveled unnoticed: stolen art. Unlike modern museums, medieval Europe had no international organization responsible for tracing missing treasures. There were no photographs, no detailed police records, no customs databases. If a jeweled chalice disappeared from a monastery in France and appeared months later in northern Italy, proving that it had been stolen was almost impossible. Distance protected the thief. Time protected the lie. Memory slowly faded. Many stolen masterpieces simply became part of new collections. Their true origins vanished beneath new stories. Sometimes an inscription was carefully removed. Sometimes a new inscription was added. A royal coat of arms might replace an older symbol. A donor's name could disappear beneath fresh metalwork. The object itself survived, but its identity changed forever. This practice was surprisingly common. Medieval craftsmen were often hired to repair damaged treasures. A goldsmith might genuinely believe he was restoring a family heirloom. Instead, he could unknowingly be helping erase evidence of an earlier theft. Every repair concealed another piece of history. Historians today often rely on tiny clues that survived these alterations. A hidden engraving beneath a decorative plate. A fragment of an older inscription. A style of metalwork belonging to a different region. The shape of a gemstone setting. Even the type of wood inside a reliquary can reveal where it was originally made. Modern scientific analysis has uncovered remarkable secrets that medieval thieves never imagined could be discovered. Wood can be dated. Pigments can be traced to specific mines. Metal composition can reveal where gold or silver originated. Microscopic tool marks preserve the signature techniques of individual workshops. Every object quietly carries evidence of its past. One of the greatest ironies of medieval art theft is that criminals often preserved what wars would have destroyed. When invaders burned monasteries, some thieves had already removed valuable manuscripts. When cathedrals collapsed during conflict, stolen treasures survived in distant collections. This does not excuse the theft, but history is filled with uncomfortable contradictions. An object stolen for selfish reasons occasionally survived because it had been stolen. Had it remained in its original location, it might have been destroyed forever. These complicated stories challenge simple ideas of right and wrong. Another fascinating aspect of medieval theft involves castles. While churches held sacred treasures, castles contained symbols of royal authority, crowns, ceremonial swords, golden drinking cups, jewelry, official seals, decorated armor, luxury furniture, illuminated legal documents. Every royal household accumulated remarkable works of craftsmanship. During succession disputes, these objects became powerful political tools. Whoever possessed the royal crown could strengthen claims to legitimacy. Whoever controlled official seals could issue convincing documents. Stealing such objects sometimes changed the course of history itself. A missing crown was more than a financial loss. It created uncertainty. Questions arose. Who had the right to rule? Had the treasure been hidden, destroyed, secretly transported? Rumors spread rapidly. In medieval politics, rumors could be almost as powerful as armies. Some royal treasures disappeared so completely that historians still debate their fate. Were they melted during desperate financial crises? Hidden before invading forces arrived? Lost beneath ruined castles? Or quietly carried away by trusted servants who never returned? The answers remain buried somewhere between legend and evidence. The medieval world also witnessed another unusual phenomenon: treasure hunting. Even during the Middle Ages, people searched for forgotten Roman wealth. Ancient ruins inspired imagination. Collapsed villas, abandoned temples, broken statues, old roads. Many believed these places concealed incredible riches. Sometimes they were correct, but treasure hunters rarely distinguished between archaeological preservation and personal profit. Ancient sculptures were broken apart, coins scattered, decorative mosaics damaged, objects removed without recording where they had been found. Although these discoveries involved artifacts older than the medieval period, they reveal that the desire to possess valuable art transcended generations. People have always searched for beautiful objects left behind by earlier civilizations. Not everyone who removed art considered themselves criminals. Some genuinely believed they were rescuing neglected treasures. An abandoned monastery might contain manuscripts slowly deteriorating from dampness. A collector could argue that removing the books ensured their survival. Sometimes this was true. Sometimes it merely justified ownership. The ethical questions remain remarkably modern. Is preserving an object enough? Or does preserving its original context matter just as much? Historians increasingly recognize that context is part of the artwork itself. Knowing where an object stood, who commissioned it, who prayed before it, who admired it. These details transform beautiful artifacts into historical witnesses. Without context, much of their story disappears. Medieval communities understood this instinctively. A reliquary belonged among familiar prayers. A manuscript belonged within its library. A statue belonged inside its church. Removing these objects altered more than physical location. It disrupted living traditions. The emotional consequences could last for generations. Children grew up hearing stories about treasures their grandparents once saw. Pilgrims arrived expecting famous shrines only to discover empty spaces. Artists attempted faithful replacements while mourning the originals. Memory became a form of resistance. Communities refused to forget what had been taken. That determination preserved countless stories that historians still study today. As Europe entered the later Middle Ages, artistic skill reached astonishing new heights. Goldsmiths mastered increasingly delicate techniques. Painters experimented with realism. Sculptors carved expressive human faces unlike anything seen before. Illuminators filled manuscripts with breathtaking detail. Ironically, artistic excellence made theft even more attractive. Exceptional craftsmanship commanded exceptional value. Collectors competed. Rulers competed. Churches competed. The demand for masterpieces grew stronger with every generation. Where demand increases, crime often follows. By now, medieval art theft had become far more than isolated acts of greed. It reflected the ambitions of kingdoms, the rivalries of monasteries, the pressures of war, the growth of commerce, and humanity's enduring fascination with beauty itself. Every stolen object carried multiple stories. The story of its creation, the story of its disappearance, the story of those who searched for it, and sometimes Centuries later, the story of its unexpected rediscovery. Some treasures would never return. Others would emerge from hidden chambers, forgotten crypts, abandoned wells, or beneath the floors of ancient churches, astonishing archaeologists and rewriting history. The hidden history of medieval art theft is therefore not only a tale of loss, it is also a story of survival, a story proving that even after hundreds of years of silence, the past still has the power to speak if we know where and how to listen. History often remembers the masterpieces that survived, the golden chalices displayed behind museum glass, the illuminated manuscripts preserved in climate-controlled libraries, the carved ivory panels admired by millions of visitors every year. But behind every surviving masterpiece lies another story, the story of everything that disappeared. For every medieval treasure that still exists today, historians believe many more have been lost forever. Some vanished into furnaces, some were destroyed by fire, some disappeared during wars, some remain hidden beneath the earth, and countless others were simply stolen. One of the greatest difficulties in studying medieval art theft is that silence dominates the historical record. When a monastery lost an important manuscript, the monks did not always record the crime. Sometimes they were too ashamed. Sometimes the thief was a powerful noble whom they dared not accuse. Sometimes the entire community had been destroyed before anyone could write down what had happened. The absence of evidence does not mean the theft never occurred. In medieval history, silence often tells its own story. This is especially true when historians compare inventories from different centuries. An object appears in one record. A century later, it is gone. No explanation follows. No sale is mentioned. No fire is recorded. No royal gift is documented. It simply disappears. These mysterious absences have become some of the greatest puzzles in medieval scholarship. Researchers spend years comparing documents from different archives, hoping to discover one forgotten letter or overlooked financial account that explains where a treasure went. Occasionally, they succeed. More often, the mystery remains unsolved. Castles presented another unique challenge. Unlike monasteries, where daily routines remained relatively stable, royal residences changed constantly. Kings traveled. Queens established temporary courts. Nobles visited with large entourages. Merchants arrived with luxury goods. Foreign ambassadors carried diplomatic gifts. The constant movement of people created endless opportunities for theft. A jeweled goblet left unattended during a banquet could disappear before sunrise. A ceremonial sword might vanish during preparations for a royal procession. Expensive tapestries could be quietly removed while rooms were being redecorated. In such busy environments, identifying the responsible person proved extremely difficult. Suspicion often fell upon servants, sometimes unfairly. Many servants remained fiercely loyal throughout their lives. Others recognized that a single stolen object could provide wealth beyond anything honest labor would ever bring. Temptation existed wherever extraordinary riches were concentrated. Even craftsmen occasionally found themselves in morally difficult situations. Imagine being a master goldsmith commissioned to repair a magnificent crown. You hold in your hands enough precious metal and gemstones to support your family for generations. Most craftsmen completed their work with complete honesty. Yet history reminds us that not everyone resisted temptation. Tiny gemstones could be replaced. Small pieces of gold might disappear. Minute alterations often escaped immediate notice. Years later, no one remembered exactly how the original object had looked. Such crimes required patience rather than violence. They unfolded slowly, almost invisibly. Another important factor shaped medieval art theft: knowledge. Professional thieves rarely stole objects they did not understand. They learned which gemstones held the greatest value. They recognized rare pigments. They knew the difference between ordinary silver and exceptionally pure metal. Experience mattered. An inexperienced criminal might ignore a beautifully illuminated manuscript because it appeared to be only a book. An informed thief recognized that months or years of artistic labor made it priceless. Knowledge transformed opportunity into profit. Medieval ports also became important crossroads for stolen treasures. Cities such as Venice, Genoa, Bruges, and others connected Europe to distant markets. Ships carried thousands of valuable objects every year. Merchants documented cargo. Taxes were collected. Customs officials inspected goods, yet inspection remained limited. A beautifully carved ivory casket among hundreds of trade items attracted little attention. Once loaded onto a ship, its journey became almost impossible to trace. Sea routes concealed many secrets. Storms complicated matters further. When ships sank, priceless cargoes disappeared beneath the waves. Modern underwater archaeology has revealed astonishing discoveries from medieval shipwrecks. Some vessels still contain luxury goods intended for wealthy buyers. Although these objects were not always stolen, such discoveries demonstrate how easily valuable artworks could vanish from history. The sea preserved what land often destroyed. Throughout the Middle Ages, rumors circulated about hidden treasures. People believed monks had buried gold before invasions. They whispered about secret chambers beneath castles. Legends described forgotten tunnels filled with royal wealth. Most stories remained legends. A few proved astonishingly accurate. Construction workers occasionally uncovered hidden rooms sealed centuries earlier. Inside lay chalices wrapped in cloth, silver candlesticks, coins, reliquaries, decorated book covers. Sometimes these discoveries matched descriptions written in medieval chronicles. Other times they revealed treasures no document had ever mentioned. Each discovery reminded historians that the medieval world still holds countless secrets. The people who hid these objects rarely imagined that hundreds of years would pass before anyone found them again. They expected to return within weeks or months. War ended, peace returned, life continued, but plague intervened. Families disappeared. Communities relocated. Memories faded. Hiding places remained. Generations later, fields covered abandoned monasteries. Forests swallowed forgotten villages.
Castles crumbled into ruins, yet beneath the soil, silent witnesses waited. Not every rediscovered object arrived intact. Wood decayed, cloth disappeared, leather rotted away, metal corroded. Even so, fragments often reveal remarkable information. A broken seal identifies a royal owner. A surviving inscription records a forgotten donation. Microscopic traces of pigment reconstruct brilliant colors that vanished centuries ago. Archaeology constantly reminds us that history survives in unexpected forms. Another overlooked consequence of medieval art theft involved education. When manuscripts disappeared, scholars lost access to knowledge. Scientific observations vanished. Ancient texts became unavailable. Medical knowledge faded. Historical records disappeared forever. Stealing a manuscript could affect generations of learning. The loss extended far beyond one building. It influenced entire intellectual traditions. This is why medieval librarians treated books with such extraordinary care. Some chained them to desks. Others locked them inside cupboards. Many carefully recorded who borrowed each volume. Even then, losses occurred. Trust remained essential. Without trust, libraries could not function. Yet trust always carried risk. As medieval Europe approached the Renaissance, appreciation for artistic achievement continued growing. Collectors increasingly valued originality. Artists began signing their work more often. Individual reputation mattered. This subtle cultural shift changed the nature of theft itself. An artwork became desirable not only because it contained gold or silver, but because a particular master had created it. Craftsmanship itself acquired lasting value. That idea would eventually transform the entire history of art collecting. But before that transformation reached its height, countless medieval masterpieces had already vanished into the shadows. Some survive today in museums whose visitors know nothing of their mysterious journeys. Others remain hidden in private collections. Many more lie beneath ruined churches, forgotten monasteries, ancient castles and fields where history sleeps beneath layers of earth. Their stories are unfinished. Their mysteries endure. And with every archaeological discovery, every newly translated medieval document, and every forgotten archive brought back into the light, another piece of the hidden history of medieval art theft slowly returns to the world that once believed it had been lost forever. As the medieval world entered the 14th and 15th centuries, the nature of artistic wealth continued to evolve. Cathedrals became even more magnificent. Royal courts displayed unprecedented luxury. Wealthy merchants commissioned paintings, sculptures, tapestries, and decorative objects that rivaled those owned by kings. Art was no longer only an expression of faith. It had also become a symbol of influence, education, and prestige. With that transformation came a new reality. The demand for extraordinary objects grew larger than ever before. Where demand exists, supply follows. When honest supply cannot satisfy desire, dishonest methods often appear. Throughout Europe, collectors searched for remarkable works that would distinguish them from their rivals.
Owning something rare carried enormous social importance. A beautifully illuminated manuscript from a famous monastery, an ivory carving from distant workshops, or a reliquary decorated by celebrated goldsmiths could elevate a family's reputation for generations. Unfortunately, thieves understood this changing world just as well as collectors did. A stolen masterpiece no longer needed to be melted for its gold. Its artistic reputation alone could make it valuable. This marked an important turning point in the hidden history of medieval art theft. Beauty itself had become a form of wealth. One fascinating consequence of this change was the increasing effort devoted to disguising stolen objects rather than destroying them. Earlier thieves often removed gemstones, melted precious metals, or dismantled elaborate works into raw materials. Later criminals sometimes preserved artworks almost completely intact. Instead of altering the object itself, they altered its history. False ownership stories became increasingly sophisticated. A noble family might claim that a valuable manuscript had belonged to their ancestors for generations. A church might insist that an unusual reliquary had arrived as a forgotten royal gift. A merchant could describe an ivory carving as an inheritance from distant relatives. Without reliable documentation, proving otherwise remained extraordinarily difficult. The medieval world depended heavily upon reputation. A respected nobleman's word carried enormous authority. A famous bishop's testimony often settled disputes. Written evidence existed, but it was limited. As a result, influential individuals could sometimes reshape history simply by repeating convincing stories. Centuries later, historians must carefully separate tradition from fact. Another challenge involved restoration. Artworks naturally aged. Paint cracked. Wood split. Metal tarnished. Fabric decayed. Every generation attempted repairs according to its own artistic tastes. These restorations sometimes erased valuable historical evidence. Original inscriptions disappeared beneath new decoration. Damaged sections were replaced with contemporary designs. Ancient gemstones were rearranged into fashionable patterns. The goal was preservation. The unintended consequence was the gradual disappearance of an object's earliest identity. Ironically, some stolen works became almost impossible to recognize because honest restorers had transformed them over hundreds of years. The people performing these repairs rarely imagined that future historians would search for clues hidden beneath their work. Yet modern technology now reveals astonishing details. Infrared imaging exposes earlier paintings beneath visible surfaces. Microscopic analysis identifies original pigments. X-rays reveal hidden construction methods. Every examination uncovers another chapter of an artwork's long journey. The object itself becomes a historical document. Its scars preserve memories that written records sometimes forgot. Trade fairs became another important meeting place where luxury goods circulated across Europe. Merchants gathered from distant kingdoms. Languages mixed. Cultures exchanged ideas. Precious objects changed hands daily. most business remained entirely legitimate. Yet among thousands of honest transactions, stolen treasures occasionally slipped unnoticed into the marketplace. A carved ivory box from England might appear months later in northern Italy. A jeweled processional cross from Germany could eventually decorate a private chapel elsewhere. Distance protected uncertainty. Questions became difficult. Answers became even harder. The medieval economy relied heavily on trust. Merchants built reputations over decades. Customers returned because honesty mattered. This culture of trust benefited commerce but also created opportunities for deception. An experienced trader with a respected name could sometimes sell objects without anyone asking difficult questions about their origin. Human nature has changed remarkably little. People often prefer convenient explanations over uncomfortable investigations. Art theft also affected diplomacy. Kings exchanged magnificent gifts to strengthen political alliances. Queens presented luxurious manuscripts during royal marriages. Bishops offered precious reliquaries to influential churches. Diplomatic generosity enhanced prestige. But diplomacy occasionally concealed darker realities. A treasure described as a generous gift might originally have been taken from another community during war or political conflict. Its violent history disappeared beneath ceremonial language. Recipients admired the beauty. The original owners mourned the loss. Both stories existed simultaneously. History often preserves only one of them. Medieval artists themselves sometimes witnessed these complicated journeys. A master goldsmith might recognize his own work years later in another kingdom. A manuscript illuminator could unexpectedly encounter a familiar page in a distant monastery. Whether they questioned its presence depended upon circumstances. Political power discouraged uncomfortable conversations. Silence often became the safest response. Not every missing artwork was ever intended to disappear forever. Occasionally, treasures were borrowed for important ceremonies, royal celebrations, or religious festivals. Travel involved considerable risk. Caravans faced bandits. Roads became impassable. Wars interrupted communication, and borrowed objects sometimes failed to return for reasons unrelated to theft. Years passed, ownership became disputed. Eventually, memory blurred. Honest misunderstandings evolved into permanent separations. This reminds us that medieval history rarely fits simple categories. Every disappearance carried its own unique story. Perhaps the greatest tragedy involves the countless masterpieces that no longer exist at all. Imagine walking into a medieval cathedral filled with shimmering golden altarpieces, painted statues glowing with vivid colors, embroidered banners sparkling beneath candlelight, and stained glass windows illuminating jewel-covered shrines. Now imagine centuries of war, neglect, theft, fire, and political upheaval gradually removing those treasures one by one. What survives today is extraordinary. What has been lost was likely even greater. Yet despite these immense losses, medieval artistic achievement continues to inspire admiration around the world. Every surviving manuscript represents hundreds that vanished. Every preserved reliquary stands in memory of many that were destroyed. Every carved sculpture reminds us of countless forgotten masterpieces known only through faded descriptions in ancient chronicles. The hidden history of medieval art theft is therefore not merely a record of crimes. It is the story of civilization's struggle to protect beauty against greed, conflict, ambition, and the passage of time. It is the story of ordinary monks who risked their lives hiding sacred treasures, of craftsmen whose masterpieces traveled farther than they ever imagined, of kings who viewed art as proof of divine authority, of collectors driven by admiration as well as ambition, and of historians, archaeologists, and conservators who continue searching for answers centuries after the original witnesses disappeared. Every rediscovered object rewrites part of history. Every translated manuscript reveals forgotten names. Every archaeological excavation uncovers another fragment of a world that refused to surrender its beauty completely. The Middle Ages may seem distant, but their hidden treasures and the mysteries surrounding their disappearance still shape our understanding of the past today. And the most remarkable discoveries are yet to come. For history has an extraordinary habit of revealing its greatest secrets only when we least expect them. The closer historians examine the medieval world, the more they realize that art theft was rarely an isolated crime. It was often connected to larger events that reshaped entire kingdoms. A stolen manuscript might influence political negotiations. A missing royal crown could weaken a ruler's claim to the throne. A vanished reliquary might cause thousands of pilgrims to change their destination, affecting the economy of an entire region. Art was deeply woven into medieval society. Removing a single object could change far more than the appearance of a church or a castle. It could alter history itself. One of the greatest challenges facing medieval authorities was identifying stolen property. Unlike modern objects with serial numbers, photographs, and official registrations, medieval treasures depended upon descriptions. A document might mention a golden chalice decorated with 12 sapphires and 4 rubies. But what if someone replaced the gemstones? What if the base was altered? What if a new inscription was engraved around the rim? The object would still exist, yet proving its identity became extraordinarily difficult. This uncertainty encouraged professional deception. Some craftsmen were hired to reshape stolen treasures into completely new works of art. A damaged crown could become several ceremonial cups. A jeweled reliquary might be transformed into an altar cross. Silver candlesticks could become decorative plates. The precious materials survived, but the original masterpiece disappeared forever. To later generations, it appeared as though the first object had never existed. Only scattered records hinted at what had been lost. Historians often compare this process to the recycling of memory itself. The material remained. The story vanished. Another overlooked aspect of medieval art theft involved the movement of knowledge. Monasteries regularly exchanged books with one another. Scholars traveled across Europe to study important manuscripts. Universities were beginning to emerge, creating increasing demand for rare texts. Most exchanges were honest, yet opportunities for theft naturally increased. Borrowed books sometimes failed to return. Copies replaced originals. Ownership marks were carefully erased. Because manuscripts were copied by hand, distinguishing one version from another was not always simple. A thief possessing patience and skill could create convincing confusion. Libraries gradually developed more detailed catalogs. Monks added ownership inscriptions inside books. Some included elaborate warnings against theft. Others wrote lengthy prayers asking God to protect their collections. These inscriptions still survive in many medieval manuscripts today. Reading them offers a remarkable glimpse into the fears of the people who created them. They understood how fragile their cultural heritage truly was. The spread of universities also changed attitudes toward books. Knowledge became increasingly valuable beyond monasteries. Lawyers, physicians, theologians, and philosophers all required manuscripts. Demand grew steadily. Every increase in value attracted dishonest individuals willing to profit from scarcity. Not every medieval thief was motivated by poverty. Some were educated, some belonged to respected families. A few even held religious positions. History repeatedly reminds us that crime does not belong to a single social class. Opportunity can tempt almost anyone. Meanwhile, Europe's growing cities created entirely new markets for luxury goods. Urban merchants accumulated wealth rivaling that of many nobles. Successful trading families decorated their homes with imported art, carved furniture, fine textiles, and precious metalwork. Private ownership of luxury objects expanded dramatically. As collections grew, so did the number of potential targets. Unlike monasteries, private houses often lacked substantial security. Nighttime theft became increasingly common. Wooden shutters, simple locks, narrow streets, crowded neighborhoods. These conditions favored experienced criminals. Recovery remained unlikely once stolen goods disappeared into busy commercial districts. Markets were filled with second-hand goods. Travelers arrived daily, merchants departed just as quickly. Tracking a single object became nearly impossible. Another fascinating aspect of medieval theft involved seals. Official wax seals authenticated documents, letters, and legal agreements. Stealing a noble's seal carried enormous consequences. With it, forged documents could appear genuine. False ownership claims could be created. Invented donations could transfer valuable artworks from one institution to another. Forgery and theft frequently worked together. One crime supported the other. The medieval legal system struggled to respond effectively. Judges relied heavily upon witness testimony. Physical evidence remained limited. Scientific investigation did not exist. If respected individuals supported a false story, innocent victims sometimes failed to recover their property. Justice depended as much upon reputation as evidence. War continued to produce the greatest losses. Each invasion scattered artistic treasures across Europe. Victorious rulers displayed captured objects as symbols of triumph. Defeated communities remembered them as painful reminders of destruction. Centuries later, these conflicting memories still influence discussions about cultural heritage. Should objects taken during medieval conflicts remain where they have survived for hundreds of years? Or should they return to their original homes? There is no universally accepted answer.
Every case possesses its own history. Every object carries multiple identities. The place where it was created, the place where it was displayed, the place where it was hidden, the place where it survived. Its journey becomes part of its significance. Modern archaeology continues to transform our understanding of these journeys. Ground-penetrating radar identifies hidden chambers beneath ancient churches. Scientific dating reveals when wooden sculptures were carved. Chemical analysis traces pigments to distant mines. DNA research even identifies the animals whose skins became medieval parchment. Technology allows historians to ask questions unimaginable only a few decades ago.
Each answer reveals new mysteries. A manuscript thought to belong to one monastery turns out to have originated elsewhere. A reliquary, believed to be local, contains materials imported from across continents. An altar cross displays repair techniques from several different regions. The objects themselves become witnesses, silently preserving evidence across hundreds of years. Perhaps the greatest lesson offered by medieval art theft is the extraordinary resilience of culture. Despite invasions, fires, political collapse, disease, and relentless theft, countless masterpieces still survived. Artists continued creating. Monks continued copying books. Goldsmiths continued shaping precious metals. Communities rebuilt what had been lost. Generation after generation refused to abandon beauty. That determination ensured that at least part of the medieval artistic world reached the present day. When we stand before a surviving medieval manuscript, gaze upon a carved stone saint, or admire a jeweled reliquary in a museum, we are not merely looking at an object. We are witnessing a survivor. It has escaped war. It has escaped fire. It has escaped neglect. And perhaps somewhere in its long and mysterious journey, it escaped theft as well. Every surviving masterpiece carries countless untold stories. Stories of those who created it, those who protected it, those who coveted it, those who nearly destroyed it, and those who ensured that centuries later, we would still have the privilege of seeing it with our own eyes. Yet many mysteries remain unsolved. Many treasures are still missing. Some may rest beneath forgotten monastery ruins. Others may lie inside sealed crypts, hidden castle walls, or ancient shipwrecks beneath the sea. Perhaps a few survive quietly in overlooked collections, their true identities still waiting to be recognized. History has surprised us before. It almost certainly will again. As the Middle Ages drew towards their final centuries, Europe was changing rapidly. Kingdoms grew stronger, trade expanded farther than ever before, and artistic achievement reached remarkable new heights. Workshops in Italy, France, England, Germany, and the Low Countries produced masterpieces that reflected centuries of accumulated knowledge. Painters experimented with realism, sculptors created figures filled with emotion, and goldsmiths perfected techniques that seemed almost impossible. Yet while art flourished, so did the determination to possess it. By now, medieval art theft had become far more than the work of desperate individuals searching for quick wealth. It had become intertwined with politics, diplomacy, religion, commerce, and ambition. Every magnificent object represented power. Every treasured manuscript represented knowledge. Every jeweled reliquary represented spiritual authority. Owning these objects meant controlling part of history itself. One of the most remarkable developments during this period was the increasing awareness that certain works possessed value beyond their materials. Earlier generations often admired the gold and precious stones decorating an object. Later generations increasingly admired the artist's skill. This subtle shift transformed the fate of many masterpieces. Instead of melting a magnificent chalice into raw gold, collectors sometimes preferred to preserve its craftsmanship. Instead of dismantling an ivory carving, they displayed it intact. Instead of scraping gold from an illuminated manuscript, they treasured the paintings themselves. The idea that artistic genius deserved protection slowly gained strength. It was not yet universal. Many masterpieces continued to disappear. But an important cultural change had begun. Meanwhile, monasteries and cathedrals became more organized in documenting their possessions. Inventories grew longer and more detailed. Objects were described with increasing precision. Donors' names were carefully recorded. Special storage rooms were strengthened. Multiple officials were sometimes required to unlock important treasuries. These improvements reflected painful experience. Communities had learned difficult lessons from centuries of theft. Security evolved because danger never disappeared. Even so, determined criminals adapted just as quickly. Some relied on bribery. Others exploited political instability. A few simply waited patiently until wars or natural disasters created opportunities. History repeatedly demonstrates that no security system remains perfect forever. Human ingenuity serves both protection and crime. Collectors also played a growing role in preserving medieval art. Although some acquired questionable objects, others became genuine guardians of cultural heritage. Private libraries protected manuscripts during periods of war. Noble families preserved religious treasures that might otherwise have been destroyed. Royal collections safeguarded masterpieces through generations of political change. These collections were far from perfect. Ownership remained controversial. Yet without them, many works might not exist today. This complicated legacy continues to shape discussions about cultural heritage across the world. Every medieval object has its own biography. It was created, admired, used, protected, sometimes stolen, sometimes recovered, sometimes altered, sometimes forgotten, and occasionally rediscovered centuries later. These long journeys remind us that history is never static. Objects continue living long after the people who made them have disappeared. Another fascinating aspect of medieval art theft lies in what historians call accidental survival. A manuscript hidden during an invasion escapes destruction because nobody remembers where it was concealed. A reliquary, sealed inside a church wall, survives while the visible treasures are looted. A chest buried beneath a monastery floor remains untouched because the community that buried it perishes during plague. These stories sound almost unbelievable, yet archaeology has repeatedly confirmed that such events truly occurred. Fear sometimes became the greatest protector of art. People hid treasures expecting to recover them within days. Instead, centuries passed. Modern excavations continue revealing forgotten collections beneath ancient churches, ruined castles, abandoned monasteries, and medieval city streets. Every discovery reshapes historical understanding. Each object answers old questions while creating new ones. Who hid it? Why was it never recovered? What dangers forced such desperate decisions? Often the object itself cannot answer. It remains silent. Historians must reconstruct the story from fragments of evidence. Tiny clues become enormously important. A broken seal, a faded inscription, a fragment of cloth, a forgotten financial record. Together, these pieces create remarkable narratives. Modern technology has revolutionized this search. Scientific dating, microscopic examination, chemical analysis, digital imaging, three-dimensional scanning. These methods reveal details invisible to earlier generations. A manuscript erased hundreds of years ago may still preserve hidden writing beneath the surface. A painted sculpture thought to be plain stone may reveal brilliant original colors. A damaged reliquary may contain fragments proving its true origin. Every technological advance allows history to speak more clearly. Perhaps the most enduring lesson from the hidden history of medieval art theft is that cultural heritage is extraordinarily fragile. Civilizations invest generations creating beauty. Destroying it can take only moments. A single fire, a single invasion, a single dishonest decision. Centuries of craftsmanship may disappear forever. This realization has shaped modern attitudes toward preservation. Museums, archives, libraries, conservation laboratories, and archaeological teams all exist partly because humanity has learned how easily the achievements of the past can vanish. The medieval world paid a heavy price for that lesson. Countless masterpieces were lost. Yet countless others survived through courage, determination, faith, and sometimes extraordinary luck. Monks risked their lives hiding manuscripts. Craftsmen rebuilt damaged treasures after devastating wars. Communities donated precious resources to replace stolen altars. Generations refused to allow beauty to disappear completely. Their resilience ensured that fragments of the medieval world still stand before us today. Every cathedral that still rises above a European city. Every illuminated manuscript resting inside a library. Every carved ivory figure, every stained glass window, every surviving reliquary. Each one represents victory over time itself. It has endured centuries of uncertainty. It has survived thieves, wars, political revolutions, natural disasters, neglect, and changing beliefs. Its continued existence is nothing short of extraordinary. Yet beyond every surviving masterpiece lies an invisible museum. A museum filled with artworks, known only through descriptions. Golden shrines melted into coins, painted altars consumed by fire, royal crowns dismantled for gemstones, libraries scattered across continents, sculptures broken beyond recognition. These lost treasures remain part of history, even though they no longer exist. Their absence reminds us that the story of medieval art is not only about what survived, it is equally about what disappeared. And it is within that balance between survival and loss that the hidden history of medieval art theft continues to captivate historians, archaeologists, collectors, and anyone who has ever wondered how much of humanity's greatest artistic heritage has vanished into the shadows of time. Every mystery eventually reaches a point where the remaining questions become more important than the answers. The hidden history of medieval art theft is one of those rare stories. It begins with stolen relics, vanished manuscripts, looted cathedrals, and ambitious rulers, but it ends with something far greater. It forces us to ask what civilization chooses to remember, what it chooses to forget, and how easily the achievements of entire generations can disappear. When people think about the Middle Ages, they often imagine castles, knights, kings, queens, and towering cathedrals. Those images are familiar because they survived. Stone walls resisted time better than wood and cloth. Massive buildings outlasted countless political revolutions. Yet the movable treasures that once filled those buildings tell a very different story. Imagine entering a great cathedral in the year 1300. Candles illuminate walls covered with painted saints. Golden chalices rest upon the altar. Reliquaries sparkle with rubies and sapphires. Silk banners hang from towering columns. Choirs fill the air with sacred music. Shelves hold beautifully illuminated manuscripts copied over generations. Every object reflects extraordinary skill. Every object carries history. Now imagine returning 200 years later. Wars have passed through the region. Kings have risen and fallen. Fires have consumed neighboring towns. Religious conflicts have transformed entire kingdoms. The cathedral still stands, but the treasures are gone. The walls appear strangely empty. The altar has changed. The manuscripts have vanished. Only a handful of surviving objects hint at the unimaginable richness that once existed. This silent transformation happened repeatedly across medieval Europe. Entire collections disappeared without leaving clear explanations. Sometimes the reason was conquest, sometimes economic hardship, sometimes natural disaster, sometimes deliberate theft. Often several of these forces combined. What makes medieval art theft so fascinating is that it cannot be separated from the wider history of humanity itself. Every stolen object reflects a human decision. Someone desired wealth. Someone sought political influences. Someone believed a holy relic belonged elsewhere. Someone hoped to preserve beauty from approaching destruction. Someone betrayed trust Someone demonstrated remarkable courage, protecting priceless treasures at enormous personal risk. These choices shaped history far more than the objects themselves. Perhaps the greatest heroes in this hidden story rarely appear by name. Unknown monks carried manuscripts into forests before invading armies arrived. Anonymous craftsmen repaired damaged masterpieces after devastating wars. Ordinary citizens concealed sacred objects beneath church floors, while cities collapsed around them. Librarians carefully copied ancient texts again and again because they understood that knowledge survives only when someone is willing to preserve it. Without these countless unnamed individuals, the medieval artistic world would have disappeared almost completely. History often celebrates conquerors, yet civilizations survive because ordinary people refuse to surrender their cultural memory. Modern archaeology continues proving that the past is never entirely lost. Each excavation reveals forgotten chapters, a hidden chamber beneath a ruined monastery, a manuscript discovered inside an ancient binding, a jeweled cross recovered from beneath cathedral foundations, a collection of coins buried during an invasion. Every discovery reminds us that history still holds countless secrets beneath the ground. Modern technology has become one of history's greatest allies. Infrared imaging uncovers erased writing. X-rays reveal hidden paintings beneath visible surfaces. Scientific dating identifies ancient wood. Chemical analysis traces pigments across continents. Digital reconstruction allows damaged masterpieces to be studied in astonishing detail. The medieval thieves who believed they had erased every trace of their actions could never have imagined such possibilities. The objects themselves continue telling their stories. Even broken fragments preserve remarkable evidence. The hidden history of medieval art theft also teaches an important lesson about value. During the Middle Ages, many treasures were destroyed simply because their gold seemed more valuable than their artistic beauty. Today we often view those lost masterpieces very differently. Their craftsmanship would likely be considered priceless. This change reflects the evolution of human thought. Civilizations gradually learned that cultural heritage cannot be measured only by precious metals or financial worth. Beauty possesses its own value. Memory possesses its own value. History possesses its own value. These ideas shape museums, libraries, conservation laboratories, and archaeological projects across the world today. Yet despite all modern efforts, thousands of medieval treasures remain missing. Some may never be found. Perhaps they were melted centuries ago. Perhaps they rest beneath forgotten fields. Perhaps they lie inside shipwrecks beneath the sea. Perhaps they survive unnoticed in remote collections, waiting for careful research to reveal their true identity. History has repeatedly surprised us. Objects believed lost forever have suddenly reappeared after hundreds of years. Forgotten manuscripts have emerged from monastery shelves. Hidden sculptures have been discovered inside church walls. Ancient treasures have surfaced beneath ordinary farmland during construction projects. Every remarkable discovery reminds us never to underestimate the endurance of the past. Even after centuries of silence, history sometimes chooses to speak again. The story of medieval art theft is ultimately not a story about criminals alone. It is the story of human civilization struggling to protect its imagination. Artists transformed stone into faith. Goldsmiths shaped metal into symbols of hope. Scribes preserved knowledge one careful letter at a time. Builders raised cathedrals that inspired generations. Collectors admired beauty. Thieves sought profit. Kings pursued power. Monks defended memory. Every one of them became part of the same extraordinary story. Today, when millions of people visit museums, libraries, castles, monasteries, and medieval cathedrals, they rarely think about everything that is missing. They admire what survived. Yet every surviving masterpiece also represents countless works that did not survive. Behind every illuminated manuscript rests the memory of many others that vanished. Behind every preserved reliquary stands the absence of those melted into anonymous bars of gold. Behind every carved statue lies the shadow of sculptures broken beyond repair. The medieval world we know today is therefore only a fragment of what once existed. But perhaps that fragment is enough. Enough to remind us that beauty deserves protection. Enough to remind us that history belongs not only to the powerful, but also to those willing to preserve it. Enough to remind us that every generation inherits treasures created by those who came before, and carries the responsibility of passing them safely to those who will come after. That may be the greatest lesson hidden within the long and mysterious history of medieval art theft. Because in the end, the true treasure was never gold. It was memory. It was creativity. It was the determination of ordinary people to ensure that even after centuries of war, greed, and loss, the story of the Middle Ages would never be completely stolen,